As I've talked about many times on the Culture Architects podcast, culture has an enormous influence on how people perform. Whether we're talking about a business, a sports team, a military unit, or even a group of friends. And we've had guests share insights here from nearly all of those different perspectives. But there's one particular question that we haven't yet addressed, and it's one that I've been thinking about for some time now. What does it mean to be the culture architect of one's family? Today on the Culture Architects podcast, we're joined by a brother-sister duo, Stephen Shapiro and Nancy Shapiro Rapport, two lifelong educators from Columbus, Ohio, with whom I've been collaborating to explore this question over the past year or so. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the result of that collaboration, specifically a really cool system called Our Family Culture that's designed to help parents be more purposeful in creating a healthy culture for their families. We've all heard that it takes a village to raise a child, and Stephen and Nancy each have over 3 decades of experience with exactly that. In the time that we've worked together, I've seen how their expertise in working with children and families marries perfectly with my own work on culture building. I think you're going to find this story to be really fascinating. Nancy, Stephen, welcome to the Culture Architects podcast.
Thank you, David.
Ed.
Great to have you with us. So before we do anything else, let's just get some background for our audience. Stephen and Nancy, how did each of you get into the public education as a career? I know you both spent careers there. How did you get into that? And what sustained your passion for education over these last 3 decades? Maybe let's start with Nancy on that question.
Okay. Wow. As soon as you said that, David, I went right back to my best friend's basement when I was little, where I had a whole schoolhouse down there with my best friend, complete with grade books, worksheets, the whole, you name it. So I was teaching school from a very young age. And I think in my heart always knew that teaching was what I wanted to do. I had a brief jog away from that when I went to Boston University. Thought I was going to go into communications, ended up leaving and going to Ohio State University and becoming an English education major. And so I got into education, I think just very naturally. It just felt it felt like what I was meant to do.
And how about for you, Stephen? How did you get into it?
Well, I didn't go into education because I wanted to be just like my own teachers or have the same, replicate the same experience in school that I had. I was actually drawn to the profession because I wanted to transform the lives of kids. I just knew that what happened in school for me was significantly less powerful than what was possible. And I really spent my entire career trying to provide enormous, powerful, breakthrough, life-changing learning for kids. And so I was never someone who was satisfied to teach out of the textbook or give a multiple choice test. I spent my whole time trying to say, what's possible in your life? You know, I saw myself as a developer of human potential, not as someone who was teaching a curriculum. And that's pretty much been the focus of everything I've done in my life, is how do I help really transform people's lives to reach full potential of what's possible?
And I know you've mentioned to me before, and maybe explain a little bit for our audience, that given that what you just said, that you're very focused on experiential learning. So what is experiential learning, and why was that something you were drawn to?
Well, what I knew as a person was that what I learned in a book or what I learned from a lecture, I usually forgot very quickly. But what I experienced personally, I remembered. Those were the things that changed me. And so I knew that if I wanted my students to have lifetime, life-changing learning experiences, it had to be more than I'm going to tell you something in a lecture or you're going to read a textbook and then take a multiple choice test about it. And so for me, all of my work that I did was trying to give kids the opportunity to engage in powerful learning experiences that would potentially transform them. And I knew only experience could do that.
Now, Nancy, you had gone from teaching, though, into being a counselor in school, right? Tell us about how did that transition take place, and why did that take place, and what did you learn from that?
I think, again, it was a natural, and some circumstances happened that had me go that direction to get my master's in school counseling. And that was, as an English teacher, kids would write very personal things when they would write things to me or for me for my class. And I felt like I really was developing these very deep connections with kids. And not only was I able to help them with their writing, I was also able to help them and guide them in their own lives. And so one particular year, it was right before, it was right at the beginning of a school year. Our dad actually passed away at the age of 56. And that happened right before the school year started. And it was a very difficult way for me to start the school year. And I remember I told my students about it. And the reason I did is I just said, I want you to know that I'm not my best right now. And for you, I want to be my very best. And I want us to have a great year. So I want you to know what's happening with me personally and know that I'll be back with you. Like I'm right now, I'm in a tough place, but it's going to get better. And the kids were incredible. The sad thing, the extra sad thing that happened was a few weeks later, one of my students who happened to be an 8th grader, it was the first week after school started, passed away in an accidental, in an accident that was pretty tragic and unexpected. And so I believe because of my sharing with my students, they felt this complete openness. So instead of going to the other supports in the building, they came to me. And I dedicated that year to working with my kids, my students, in helping to build a space to grieve, space to talk, space to learn and grow and understand a little bit about how to manage those very difficult things that happen in life. And at the end, we ended up doing a really beautiful community memorial to the student at the end of the school year. And that was it. I was in graduate school pretty quickly after that.
So then you realized that counseling was a place that you could really make a difference.
For sure.
So as you've each had different but similar experiences in the education world, and I'm curious. So how did that translate into this passion that evolved for family cultures? What was the impetus for that, and how did that happen?
Well, I think a big part of it was that the youth mental health crisis, we were front row witnesses to what was changing in kids and parents' lives. So over the course of our career, the rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness expanded tremendously, and we saw kids really struggling and suffering. But what we witnessed was that some kids seemed to be doing great. Many kids were really struggling. Some kids were doing great. And the question was, why were some kids doing great while others were struggling? And what Nancy and I both observed was that those kids disproportionately came from families that had much stronger and clearer sense of what was important in their family. So the kids weren't getting pushed aside by what the internet was saying was important, what kids on social media were saying was important, what influencers were saying was important. They knew what mattered in their family. And we recognized before our careers ended that we had to help families build stronger cultures if they wanted to raise healthier kids.
And so as you saw those, you both witnessed those changes that were occurring in the, as you said, the increased incidence of loneliness, depression, anxiety, et cetera. I'm curious, did you find, was there any demographic correlation to that, or was it purely just a function of those that came from families that were clear about what they were about was the primary difference?
I don't think there was a demographic. In fact, a lot of the research shows that kids in upper middle class and upper class families are doing even worse overall than kids in middle class and working class families. So it wasn't like, oh, if I have enough money or if I live in a safe enough place or if I provide my kids with enough resources, they'll be okay from this thing. And in fact, in many ways, those kids were doing worse than the kids who didn't have all those advantages.
Interesting. So you guys both started to have this recognition that there's something going on here that separates those who are really struggling with these kinds of issues with those who are, I'll say, struggling less. Probably everybody struggles at some level. And you start to feel like, we need to do something about this. So fast forward in there, somewhere in there, you're thinking about, we ought to do something about this. You're also approaching the point of retiring from teaching. Did those two coincide, or did one lead to another, or how did that take place?
I would say our conversations really started when we would go home for Thanksgiving. We always went home to our hometown, the home we grew up in, and we would all stay under one roof. So both my brother's families, my family, and it was one of the most joyful times where we spent together, where we were all together talking a lot. And Steve and I just really started talking a lot about what we wanted to do. And we both had this little bug that kept saying to us, there's more that we need to do when we retire. We can't be done, but we know that we need to do something that's going to have a big impact. And what we actually talked about it and started doing some work and having phone calls with people about 4 years before we retired. And each year we'd say, maybe we'll work in the summer, or we said, we get together. And then finally the last 2 years, we're like, you know what, let's table this. We're going to really do this when we retire. And so we've been thinking about it for a very long time. And then we put it into action after we retired. But our action initially looked very different than it does today.
So you knew then, it sounds like, that before you retired, okay, when we retire, we're going to work on this thing. This is something we're going to do. And so talk about, so you retired, how long ago did you retire for our audience sake?
Both of us 2 years ago.
2 years ago. So 2 years ago, you retire and get to working on family culture. And so what was the initial plan for how you were working on doing that?
Well, so it was very different than what it is right now. Our initial plan was because we're teachers and because we like working directly with people and creating community and creating culture, which is a sort of a gift that teachers have when you create culture with your students year after year after year. We thought that we would develop a course for parents. And we worked really hard while we were also trying to move our mom to town. She's aging, we had a lot of competing things happening, but we were building a course that was designed to help people really explore their parenting, how they were parented, how their partner was parented, make sure they were sharing both of those sharing with each other, what that was like, not leaving it up to it comes out in an argument sometimes. And then we ended up, we wanted to go kind of deep, and we built an 8-week curriculum of a course that was designed to meet either in person or online. And we were going to really help. It wasn't going to be a lot of people because we could only work with however many couples at a time. And it was going to go really deep. And then something happened.
So let's talk about that again for the sake of our audience. So Stephen and Nancy, you've had this long-term vision of, okay, we're going to do something to really help these families. We're going to wait till we retire. You retire, you start working on that. And then we got a chance to meet each other. So tell for our audience, how did we get to meet and what precipitated that?
Well, I was at a networking event. It was actually a group of folks who were working on equity issues in Central Ohio. And somebody asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm working on this culture building for families. And she said, have you read the book Culture by Design by David Friedman? It's a really great book. I think you'll find it interesting. And so I said, okay. I ordered the book and I read it. And there was a passage at the end of the book. I mean, we found the book great all through. And there were so many great ideas for us in our culture building work. But at the end, there was a part that talked about how culture building could happen in any group. And it didn't matter whether it was a team or a sport or a club or a school or a classroom or a business. And you wrote, some people ask me if I used the fundamental system with my family. And I always say, I wish I had. And when we read that passage, we thought, we got to talk to this guy because this is what we're trying to do. And we sent an email. And within an hour, you responded, which we later learned because one of your fundamentals is our response time. And you were fanatically responsive.
It happens to be the one we're on this week as we're recording this, by the way, just coincidentally.
Good one. I will tell you, David, you nailed it. And literally that night, we were on a phone call with you, on a Zoom call. And within a month, we had enough conversation that we thought we should be doing this together. Our expertise with kids and parents combined with your expertise in culture building was a perfect marriage. And that if we put those two together, we could build something really powerful that not a small number, but a large number of families could use to raise really amazing, emotionally healthy, strong kids in close-knit families.
So this really became an opportunity to do what you were intending to do, but for a much larger audience. That if we could figure out a system to do that and to fill in for our audience, this is something that I had been thinking about for a long time as well, and had in fact worked with a few families just on an ad hoc basis. Sometimes a CEO of a company that we've worked with in our typical business culture work, would ask me, hey, could you help me do something like this for our families? And so I had worked with a few families, and it had always been in the back of my mind that, yeah, someday, maybe not when I retire, but someday I'll get around to working on that idea of taking the methodology that we've created for businesses and applying that methodology more specifically to families. And so as Stephen and Nancy and I started to talk about this, we began to realize that there was an opportunity here to combine forces and take the concept behind what I was thinking, along with the work that Stephen and Nancy and the experience that they had working with families, and combine those and try to create some kind of a system. And so just for our audience sake, share a little bit about, so what is that system, and how did we take the concept of practicing fundamentals, which is what we teach. And let me just give a little bit of background for audience members who might be new to this podcast. So the system that we've always taught for businesses in the company CultureWise is to define a set of behaviors that a company or organization really wants to promote in their company. So the idea is, if we define the behaviors that are really important I'll take this in a business setting and say, okay, these are the things you really want to do, being a fanatic about response time being just one of those. But if we could define these behaviors, and I give those behaviors a name, it's just my nomenclature that I made up years ago, I call them fundamentals. If we could do that, and then we could introduce it into the organization, and then we could take one each week, which in business we call a fundamental of the week, and we focus on that, and we do a series of activities to practice it all week long. And the first week we're on week number 1, and the second week we're on 2, and the third week we're on 3, and so on. And if we cycle through them over and over and over and over again, those behaviors, those fundamentals, as we call them, will eventually become ingrained. So that was the concept that I've been doing for businesses for the last 20 years, and we've done it for over 1,000 businesses, and it's a very successful methodology. It was that same methodology that we began to think, well, wouldn't that work in a family? So given that context, Stephen and Nancy, talk a little bit about, so what did we create for families using that methodology?
So we created something that was exactly what you just said, David. It is simple. It's easy to use. It is not something that adds an extra half hour to your day each day, because where in the world would parents find that?
Yeah.
It's something that is embedded into the times that you're connecting with your kids naturally each day. And we developed a set of 44 fundamentals that are family fundamentals. And when I think back on the process, it's fascinating to me, because I remember some of the back and forth we had when we were talking. Because for Stephen and me, it was so fundamental that we are with people and that we're connecting with people. And we were going deep. We were asking people to dig really deep, and you're like, no, do people really need to dig that deep? I think if you really, people don't necessarily have the desire to do that. They want to know what to do now. And so we listened very carefully, and we really came along and said that the way you do your fundamental system with people in businesses will work for families. It's different than what we were hoping to do. But I will say that the one piece that is extremely important to both of us as we do this work with our family culture, where you pick your 13 to 20 fundamentals, you out of the 44, you practice one a week until you get through all of them. Then you start over with new content. It's designed to take 5 minutes a day at that. And I think what we realized is that works, and community is important to us. So we've thought of some ways that we want to build our family culture community on top of doing what we're doing there. So having places where we can crowdsource, where we can be with people. We're talking about ways that we can make it feel more personal.
The concept then, so we've got a library of fundamentals that have been created there. Nancy referred to the 44 family fundamentals. That's a library that people choose from, because of course every family is a little bit different, and there isn't one size fits all for all families. So people are going to choose from that, and then they're going to choose their unique ones that work for them, and then practice them every single week. And so Talk to me, Stephen, about how would they practice? So like if I'm an audience member, I'm hearing this, okay, I got the idea that I'm going to pick a set of family fundamentals that you've created from the list. I don't really understand. How would I be practicing them describe what that looks like, Stephen?
Sure. So once you pick your family fundamentals, and they'll be unique to your family. I mean, you'll have something in common with every other Our Family Culture family, but there are literally billions of combinations of different fundamentals you may have. So your family has your own unique combination, and you'll start with week 1. And in each week, we provide you with really simple ways to center that. So let's say one of the most common fundamentals that families choose is practice kindness. Almost everybody wants to raise kind kids. And so each day during that week, we'll send you some small way to center the practice of kindness in your family. So something simple like a discussion question. We might send you something so for example, instead of at dinner saying, how was school today? Or what'd you do in school today? Your question that's delivered via an app might be, what was the kindest thing you saw someone do today? And now you're talking about the practice of kindness at dinner in a really simple way, no extra. On Tuesday, we might send you a short video. Maybe it's a 2-minute video from YouTube of like a beautiful act of kindness that you can watch with your kids. And you can just watch it for 2 minutes, or maybe you have a conversation afterwards. And maybe later in the week, we'll send you a scenario. If this happened, what would you do? We have some really great content that's delivered that's what we call vulnerability questions or storytelling. And what those are is a chance for parents to tell kids stories from their past that give kids a chance to really dig deeper. So an example for practice kindness might be, parents, tell your kids a story about a time when you were less kind than you wish you had been. And ask your kids for advice on what they think you should have done or what you should do now about it. And so these are kind of opportunities for parents to tell their kids about maybe mistakes they made and to invite their kids to give them advice. And so over the course of that whole week, you're having a series of conversations about kindness. You have language, which is practice kindness. You have discussion and conversation. And by the end of the week, the idea of kindness being important in your family is clear. Now, of course, when you get back 13 or 15 or 18 or 20 weeks later to practice kindness again, it comes back. And then another 18 weeks later, it comes back. And eventually, like your kids get it. Like practicing kindness is something we do in our family. That's just who we are.
So we're taking you're selecting from a list. We're taking one each week, focusing on throughout the week, and then cycling through them over and over and over again. And
Absolutely.
so for our audience sake, give an example of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other fundamental. What practice kindness? That sounds like a great one. What other fundamentals might I be choosing from in this library?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there are 44, of course, so there are a lot of different ones you can choose. But so if you want to encourage your kids to have integrity, you might choose do the right thing. Or if a value of yours is that you want kids to be resilient or have grit, you might choose a fundamental called bounce back. We have fundamentals where you encourage your kids to keep trying. We have learn from mistakes, lean into rather. It's called lean into mistakes, which is an important one. We have ones that are more creative. And so if nature is a really important part of your family, you might choose appreciate nature.
Yeah, we have a fundamental called feel the music, which is for families that just want to like sing and dance and be joyful together. And we have one called celebrate, which is for families that want to like really celebrate and enjoy and support and nurture each other. Stick with it for families that want their kids to have perseverance. There's a whole bunch of fundamentals, but they align. If you ask any parents, what is most important to you? What kind of kids do you want to raise? We've got a fundamental for it.
Cool.
And if we don't, David, if we don't have a fundamental, this is again where we want to be with our family culture families. If there's one that's missing, then we'll write more and we'll keep adding and letting the system grow to meet our families and their needs.
So how we've got this library of fundamentals then that people are going to choose from. How do you suggest that they pick them? I mean, it must be hard to pick ones out of a long list of them. I mean, who doesn't want their kids to be kind or doesn't want them to do the right thing? I mean, wouldn't I, if I was a parent, wouldn't I want all 44 of them?
Yeah. So you know how sometimes you download an app and you start playing with it and you have no idea what to do or how it's supposed to work? One of the things that we have done with this app is we've created some videos. And this is part of our desire to build community with our family culture. So the videos really welcome you and talk to you about what the fundamentals are and talk you through how to select them. And so, for example, one of the things that we recommend, if you are working with a parenting, we refer to a parenting partner instead of a spouse, because some people have a spouse and some people don't.
Sure.
And if you don't have a spouse, that doesn't mean you can't use our family culture. It means that you're either doing it yourself or you're working with someone that you're very close to, who is your parenting partner. But we recommend that you can either select them on the app directly, or you can download a PDF, which you'll receive after you sign up. We really recommend that you take some time and choose the ones that are most important to each of you independently, and then come back together and compare a little bit. So the ones that you both have put, clearly those are ones that you want to select. But you learn a little bit about your parenting partner when you have one on your list and your partner doesn't have one on their list. And then you have these very interesting conversations about, why is that important to you? Or why is that not important to you? And truth be told, I mean, just because you don't select a fundamental, there are a lot of them. And just because you don't choose one doesn't mean you don't care about it. So it engages people in really interesting conversations that the feedback we've received from people who've had the opportunity to choose their fundamentals has been so powerful. They've really enjoyed the experience. So we talk you through that process.
I would also add that one of the things that we find is a way to consider, like a lens to look at it through, is imagine you're going to your parent-teacher conference for your child. What's something that their teacher could say about your kid that you would think like, oh, that's my kid. That's the kid I want to raise. And for some people, that's put in the work. Like when, to go in and have a teacher say, your kid is the hardest working kid that I've had in years. You're like, yes, that's my kid. For other people, it's like, include others. We had a kid move in and your kid was the one that went over and welcomed them to the class and made sure they had someone to eat lunch with. And you're like, that's my kid. So I think if you think, what is the thing that a teacher could say to you about your kid that would make you think, yes, that's the kind of kid we want to raise? Those are the fundamentals that we're encouraging families to choose.
Got it. I know, just for our audience's sake, my daughter and son-in-law use the system, and similar to what Nancy was describing, when they chose their fundamentals, they each did them separately and then compared notes. And what they found was, okay, there were, maybe 2/3 of them they had both picked. And then they each talked about, okay, well, why did you pick the ones that you did that I didn't, and vice versa? And which of those do you feel most strongly about? So maybe I picked some that my wife might not have, but it's not that big a deal to me. And there's others that I might say, this is really important to me. And just that conversation, I think, is a pretty healthy conversation for parenting partners to have, regardless of the system.
Yeah, I think what you're raising is a really important point. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from families using the system that is actually helping them have a stronger marriage, because they're talking about their parenting values in a much more direct and open way. And so I think parents show up thinking they're trying to get great kids out of this, but I think the side effect is they're also getting a great marriage out of it as well. And I think there's, in addition to comparing your values and sharing these vulnerability questions where parents are hearing stories about each other that they didn't know, there's a third thing that's really great for couples, and that is that sometimes fundamentals are in conflict with each other. And I'll give you an example. So one of the fundamentals that I would choose that's important to me is fight for what's right. I want my kids to have a sense of justice and to stand up for the right thing. My wife might choose a fundamental called show respect, because she thinks it's really important that kids show respect, especially to elders. So what might happen is one of our kids might find their teacher doing something that they think is unfair to another kid, and they may stand up for that kid. And when I hear the story, I'm thinking, good for my kid. They're fighting for what's right. I'm so proud. And my wife might hear the story and say, like, shame on my kid. They're not showing respect to their teacher, right? And so in a normal situation, if you're not part of our family culture and you're not doing this work, you and your spouse just fight. And I say, I think it's great that they did that. And she says, I think it's terrible that they did that. But now, because we have the language and the fundamentals, I might say, I really love that our kid fought for what's right. And my wife might say, well, that's great, Stephen, but I wish that they would show respect when they did it. And I'm like, that's a good point too. And now we can have a conversation with each other and with our kid about, how do you fight for what's right in a respectful way? And so instead of these two things being a point of contention amongst my spouse and myself, we can actually combine them and talk to our kid in a healthy way about them.
Yeah. It's interesting as I think about, again, the parallels between what I've learned in helping businesses to build culture and what we're talking about here is in the business setting. One of the things that I often say is that when a company is practicing a set of fundamentals, it changes the nature of coaching conversations, which is really what you're describing. And the way it changes is that the conversation becomes about the principle versus the person. That's so often in a business setting, you give somebody coaching and the team member feels like, well, why are you always picking on me? You're never satisfied with anything I do. And when we're not talking about you, we're talking about the principle. Remember, we said that, we need to be fanatics about response time. That's one of our principles here. So let's talk about what do we need to do to make sure we're getting back to this customer or this client in an appropriately timely way? Oh, yes, because we practice being a fanatic about response time. And what I hear you saying is the same kind of thing in a family setting, that, okay, if we're giving, whether it's each other as parenting partners or our children, if we're giving them feedback about something they did or didn't do, and we can talk about what's the principle here, because our family has a principle, we call them fundamentals, but our family has a principle for how we do things in our family, then every coaching conversation, feedback conversation becomes one of the principles. These are the things that matter to us. And that's a pretty powerful thing that I think a lot of people don't think about in advance.
As you talk about that, I actually think about as the kids get older too, the kids being able to have those conversations with one another versus the parents having the conversation and sharing it with the child. So you're growing and learning together as a family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also the interesting part about as this culture becomes integrated into your family, the kids may be having that conversation with their parents. So, for example, if a parent says something unkind about a coworker, you can expect maybe your kid will say, "Hey, Dad, that doesn't sound like you're really practicing kindness right there."
Yeah.
And so we're actually all in this community together of culture building. It's not just parents trying to fix their kids.
Again, just drawing the parallels between what we've learned in business and what we're learning in families is a number of years ago, I did a series of surveys of clients asking them about the biggest impact that they saw of practicing fundamentals. And the thing that I found so interesting that was one of the most often cited impacts, and I'm going to say this because it also was unanticipated. It wasn't something they were expecting to get. They only realized it afterwards. I call it the power of a common language.
Right.
When we all know what we mean when we say be a fanatic about response time, or some of the other fundamentals we teach in business are things like practice blameless problem solving or get clear on expectations, that common language is a bonding thing. And I can see the same thing happening in families when we have language around practice kindness or do the right thing or roll with it or whatever our fundamentals are. We now have a common language that makes this us. This is our family. This is the way we do things here. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing.
I think it's huge. And I think almost all teams have that.
Yes.
You look at winning sports teams, they always have language around that. One of the great examples of this for me is there's a fundamental called leave it better than you found it. I suspect that a lot of families choose that one because they have messy kids. That may be the origin of why people choose leave it better than you found it. But once you choose leave it better than you found it and you practice it, the words leave it better than you found it are with you all the time. And so my family does not practice leave it better than you found it. But because I wrote the fundamental and wrote a lot of the content for it, I literally can't walk by something. I can't walk by a piece of trash on the ground without the words leave it better than you found it coming into my head. And I pick it up.
Yeah.
I just do it. It's like it becomes sort of a mantra that shows up whether you intend to or not. And so I think that the power of language is huge.
Yes.
Once you have a common language, it actually drives behavior.
Yeah. So talk about a little bit for our audience about the creation of this content. So we understand that we're going to choose a set of behaviors, which we call fundamentals. We're going to focus on one every week and practice it over and over again. And you're going to deliver content to families to help them have a brief engagement each day during the week. So where does that content come from?
The content comes from Stephen and I doing a lot of research and work and developing it. We are natural content creators as educators. We've brought in other really incredible educators to build content along with us. We have children's books that are aligned with each one of the family fundamentals. And that's especially for people who have younger kids and want to get started, because we all know the younger you start things with your families, the deeper ingrained they become. It's harder to start something with an older child who starts wondering why. And so we have children's books, and the children's books are designed to embed the fundamental into your family's conversation in a way that makes sense for the child. And so the content we wrote and sourced the content, and we continue doing that because each time you go through a round of your fundamentals, which is what we call it, once you've gone through all the weeks of however many fundamentals you've selected, we want you to have some fresh content the next time around. And so we're constantly thinking about the fundamentals, sourcing material. Here's what we don't want. We don't want parents to be like, I can do this. And you, by the way, you can. You don't need our family culture to do this. But what you end up doing is Googling, and how do I have this conversation? And how do I do this? And then you go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and you get so lost. And so what we're trying to do is really source the best content that we can come up with ourselves and that we can find based on just all the incredible material and literature that's out there, and videos. I mean, Stephen, talk about your video experience.
I like to joke that I've watched all the seasons of YouTube. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours combing YouTube, and there are so many great 2-minute, 3-minute videos that align with every one of the fundamentals. And you can look for them yourself, but if you want to spend a couple hundred hours doing that, but we've done it for you. And so like really awesome short little videos that will just like bring the fundamental to life. And one other thing that we haven't talked about that we should mention is we're sending you something to do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you don't have to do it on those days, but we're doling it out in that way. You can see it the whole week. But on Wednesday, we have a special feature, which is called Wisdom Wednesday. And that's a day where it doesn't require you to have a conversation with your kids. It's just a 2-minute video of some great parenting wisdom. And some of that comes from us. Some of that we're sourcing from parenting experts and authors across the country. And eventually we'll be sourcing it from our own community. We'll be asking our own parents in our community, hey, what's the best piece of parenting advice you've ever gotten? And so this like 2-minute, just little tidbit of wisdom is going to come to you every week, which we think is going to be worth the price of admission, because you're getting just great little ideas that are actionable that you can bring to life in your family. Simple. And they're not aligned to any fundamental. They're just great ideas for how parents can make their family great.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this whole idea of repetition. So a foundation of the system that we teach in businesses is this idea, I call them rituals, that a ritual is something that we do over and over and over again until it just becomes baked in. You brush your teeth every morning, you go to school every day, or whatever you do, that they're just routines. And that the reason that these routines or rituals are important is because most people aren't very good at sticking with things. And we get excited about all kinds of new ideas, and then we get busy and it all falls by the wayside. But when something becomes a ritual, it's pretty easy to keep going. A lot of that concept is for any of our audience that has read James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is a wonderful book. If anybody hasn't read it that you're listening, you should read that book. But James Clear talks about the importance of creating habits for how we do things, because habits create the repetition. And when something is repeated enough, it becomes internalized. So in a business setting, the concept is, if we take these fundamentals, these behaviors, and we focus on one at a time each week, and we repeat that cycle over and over and over and over again, those behaviors start to become internalized. And so the thinking is the same thing would happen in families. And Stephen, you mentioned, the example of leave it better than you found it, as just kind of like, it's just in your head. You just can't even walk past something without it becoming part of you. And it's the concept here as well, that if we create enough repetition, these behaviors, whatever the fundamentals are in this family over a period of weeks, months, years, just become second nature to our children. So talk about why that's so important.
Well, I mean, you are trying to learn anything. Hearing it once isn't enough. You have to always repeat and hear things in different ways and in different settings. And that's true for kids. When you think about how kids learn, it is practicing and doing things over and over again until they get it right, or until they learn a particular concept. And so for us, rituals that we would hope and encourage and teach families to do would be simple. So for example, I mean, I know not all families have the opportunity to have a family dinner every single night, but maybe you make sure that on Sunday night, you have a family dinner together so that you can talk about the fundamental of the week, because our fundamental cycle starts on a Sunday. And so maybe that is one small thing that you do. Or,
And if you don't do dinner, maybe you go to church on Sunday, so you have lunch after church, or maybe it's the drive home from church when you introduce the family fundamental. It just fits into whatever your family does naturally.
exactly, things like putting your kids to bed, or when you wake up in the morning, what's something that you do that gives you just a quick minute to practice the fundamental. We've even talked about having having people write their fundamental in the kitchen somewhere, so it's there and present, so that when kids walk to the refrigerator and it's hanging on the refrigerator, they remember what the fundamental is and they're practicing it. And then the best part is they're sharing it out in the world. It's not just that they practice it at home, they're sharing it out in the world. And we really believe that if especially, I want to speak out for a moment just about people who are single parents. I was a single parent. This stuff is hard work. It's hard when you have a partner. It's twice as hard when you don't. And so if you have people in your community, in your world, good friends that you spend time with, well, if you're both doing our family culture, or if a group of you are doing our family culture, you wouldn't necessarily need to have the same fundamentals. In fact, you probably wouldn't. But just the fact that you're practicing the same type of system encourages conversations. Like, what fundamental are you guys on this week? And what's something cool that happened last week with your family? Or which one are you excited to practice again coming up? So it provides that language in a very specific way. And those habits and rituals can be very small things. Like I said earlier, we're not asking you to add 30 minutes into your day. You don't have that time. It's where do you embed it into the things that you already do.
Yeah. I think about, that repetition and the importance of that repetition. And I think about probably most of us have things that we would say, oh, mom used to always say this, or dad used to always say that. And if you just kind of step back for a moment and think, well, that's really what repetition is about, is that when mom or dad used to always say that, I heard it enough times it just sunk in. And so in a really simplistic way, this is really just a methodology to take the things that mom or dad always said and have enough repetitions so that those things become internalized in people.
And what I love really about the system, and it's when we think back to how we started with a course that was deep and would only attract so many people at a time and was limited, what I love about our family culture is that it can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. And it's such an accessible thing for people to do. We don't learn how to be parents. We just don't get that kind of instruction. And we're not teaching anyone how-tos in our family culture. We're simply providing people with the types of prompts and questions and videos and quotes and things that you can do to really clearly identify what is important to us as a family and how are we going to practice that, rather than figuring it out as you go along, which is what most of us do.
Yes, most of us have done it that way.
Parenting in survival mode instead of parenting with purpose.
Yeah.
I would add to that, we just released this, our family culture, recently. So it's a pretty new thing. We've been getting a lot of interest from around the world. It's been wild. A lot of people in Australia have been reaching out to us. We've had a really interesting Australian connection. A lot of people in Canada have been reaching out to us. We have had a conversation with a podcaster in India who's really excited about our family culture. So what's beautiful about the system is it's simple, it's easy, it's affordable. Anybody can do it, but it's not, limited to people in our neighborhood or our community, or people who can show up at the, library for a meeting. I mean, we've got people around the world can build powerful families, and that's exciting to me.
Well, I think, something that you said there, Stephen, I think is really important. And that is that, and Nancy, you just referred to it a moment ago, we're not telling anybody in the system how to run their family. We're saying you should be purposeful about creating your family, whatever that may be. And every family may be different, but you ought to be doing that in a purposeful way and not leaving it to chance. And so the Our Family Culture system is really just a tool to enable families to do whatever it is that's important to them, but to do it purposefully. And that's why it would make sense that this isn't a United States kind of thing. It's a human thing. You know, everybody's got a family and everybody wants their family to be however they want it to be, but most aren't purposeful about doing it. And so if you could have a tool to make that, makes it easier.
Right. This is a really important point, David. I think we did a lot of focus groups in preparation for this. And many of the focus groups were with parents whose kids are grown. And one of the saddest things, honestly, one of the saddest things I hear, and I hear it a lot, is parents with regret. You know, we heard a lot of parents say, I really wish when our kids were younger, we would have. And it just breaks my heart a little bit because almost everyone who has kids agrees that raising your kids, raising your family is the most important thing you'll do. Having great kids is the greatest source of pride. Work is great, but there's nothing that replaces the joy of a great family. And it's really sad to get to the end of that road and go, God, we should have focused more on this. I wish we had been more intentional or purposeful about this. And I think Our Family Culture is designed to help parents reduce the chance of them having that parenting regret. I wish we had done this. We're going to help you do it right now so you don't have to look back and say, God, I wish I had someday in the future.
You had said something to me, Stephen, when we first met early on that I don't even know if you remember saying this, but at least what I remember along those lines is you had made the comment to me, and I just thought it was an interesting perspective, that most things that we do in our lives, we have multiple chances to do them. So, you try to learn how to, I remember trying to learn how to rollerblade. Remember when rollerblading was really big? I can't do that. Some people make that look so easy, but I remember trying to do that. And yes, I did, after falling a lot, eventually get better at it. And most things that we do, we try to do something, we don't do it so well, we work at it, we get better and better with lots and lots of times attempting it. Except most of us only get one chance to be parents. So this is like the most important thing we do. And very few of us get a chance to start over and say, I didn't do that so well with my first family. I think I'm going to do this over with my next family. Now, some people do that, I guess, but not many. Most of us, we got one shot at this. And so to your point, if we don't want to have regrets about that, it would be a lot better if we were purposeful about that.
Sure. And if you think about our careers, we may do a poor job in the first job we have, or the second job, or maybe even the first company we started, but then you learn and you try again, you do something new. But right, these kids are the kids.
Yeah.
And, I think, David, you might have said something to the effect of, the best time to start building a culture is a year ago. The next best time is right now. I mean, yeah, it would have been great to have started this when our kids were 3 or 4, but even if your kids are 8 or 10 or 12, even 14 or 15, it's never too late to say, let's focus on what's important. We're here together. Parents are going to spend about 90% of the time that they will spend in their lives with their kids before they turn 18. Once your kids are past 18, they're out the door and you see them in smaller doses. And Nancy and I can both attest to this, as can you, David. You just get less time with your kids. So while you have your kids at home, this is the time to really build those powerful connections and those powerful values that you want to embed in them while you can.
Yeah. When we think about the purposeful aspect of this, which, by the way, the name of the company is Parenting with Purpose, that has developed this. But when I think about the purposeful aspect of that, one of the things I've said to many leaders, as we relate this to families, is that when you think about parenting styles, most of us, and I would say this is how I and my wife raised our children, and most of us that are listening to this probably raised their children, is that we tried to do two things. One is we tried to set a good example. We realize our kids are watching us all the time, and we try to do our best. We're not always perfect, but we try to set a good example for our kids. But secondly, we also try to use life circumstances to teach lessons. So, your daughter doesn't make the, softball team, and you use it as a chance to talk about, well, okay, what else could we do? Or your son has a, challenge with a friend or a teacher or whatever. And okay, what do we learn about life from that? And I think for really good parents, we try to use those opportunities to teach. But there's a whole nother level of intentionality that I didn't do with my children, even though they're doing great. And that I suspect most listeners probably didn't do with theirs or don't do with theirs. And that is, what if my wife and I had, when our kids were little, decided upon a set of things that we wanted to teach and had a regular way that we taught those things day after day, week after week, so that they became internalized in our children? Wow, that's a whole different level of intentionality than I did with my children, and probably most of us did with ours.
Yeah,
And I think that's the opportunity that is there for us to not have those regrets.
we talk about this all the time, that we wish we would have had this when we were raising our families.
Yeah.
And part of what made us think about it is we have children. We want to be able to offer our children the opportunity to be really intentional about how they raise their families, and that whole notion of generational legacy. I mentioned earlier that our dad died when he was 56 years old, and he never got to meet any of his 7 grandchildren. But what Stephen and I love is that often we look at our kids or we hear something they say, and we know that that's something that they learned from our dad through us.
Mhm.
So there were certain things that we really latched onto that we really wanted to teach. And we have done it, not necessarily even intentionally, just because it was important to us. And so yeah, we think there is a lot of potential. We're not saying anyone is parenting incorrectly.
Right.
There's no caveat that, like, if you don't do this, you're not a good parent. We imagine that people who just wanted that, people are out there doing their very best. And if people are like, this makes a lot of sense to me, this resonates with me, I would like to try this and see the impact it has on my family. We have a feeling those are the people that are going to check out our family culture and hopefully have such good experiences that they're able to share with other people and say, you know what, this makes a ton of sense and we should try this.
Yeah.
And we think it's powerful enough. The impact that it has on adults is powerful enough that we think a lot of schools are going to say, we should share this with the parents in our community,
Yeah.
because they're going to raise healthier kids that are going to come to our school more ready to learn and more cooperative and collaborative in their daily life. We think they're going to be CEOs who are going to say, I had to share this with my employees, because employees who are practicing strong fundamentals at home will show up at work differently and will be more productive employees. So I think there's a lot of benefit for this, not just in the family, but that people will carry into their communities, whether those are the work communities, whether they're school communities, or just their local communities, religious communities. So the impact of this is much greater than what happens inside the walls of your own home.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. So this has been a fascinating conversation as we come to the end of our time together. What I hear is there's an opportunity here for parents to be way more purposeful, way more intentional, way more systematic in how they're raising perhaps the most important people in their lives. And that if there was a tool that would make that easier, that would be a pretty good thing. And that's really what this tool is all about. So where would people get access to this tool?
Yep. Well, Our Family Culture is an app, and you can find it both in the Google Play Store and in the Apple App Store.
Well, Stephen and Nancy, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. It's been a great collaboration, and hopefully this has given our audience members a whole nother way of thinking about culture, and in fact, creating culture in perhaps the most important organization they'll ever be a part of, their families. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
David.